stall. 31 million girls in the world who are eligible for primary school do not know. That is so hard, to overcome that. Only 1 in 5 political leaders are women. 1 of 3 will be victims of violence. And this is a little bit old, so this number might be a little better now, this 222 million. But of women who have expressed need for family planning, 220 million do not have access. There's some new information now about access has gotten a lot better, so quality and choice and dignity of care is as important as access, I think, now, but we still have an access problem. And then there's increased risk for women of HIV, human trafficking, and harmful cultural practices that, just because they're cultural doesn't mean we have to embrace everything, otherwise it's a completely relativistic world. But when you're trying to work on harmful cultural practices, which I have, working with leaders from that culture who understand the context and who are making change without the wrong kind of, without judgment and blame is a strategy that really can work and really can make change. So if you find yourself pointing at someone else and saying, ew, that's probably not the way to do it. And this kind of change is global and local and personal. So we're all on this journey of becoming, we're all dealing with our own, just steering your own talents is probably really difficult for this group. But, your own healing and your own life experiences, whether they, be, conscious triggers that you know about or things that unconsciously are impacting your life are part of it too. So this is very personal, and the idea of the 4W kind of leadership is, when you're accompanying people in suffering, it's not magically good for you too. Some of it, gets in, and you have to figure out how to do the self-care and care for each other to be able to be in that work for life. So think about that as you go through your training on it. So how do we make change? We have this kind of program model that I really like. It's not like an academic program, it's not like a department, it's not really like a research program, but all of those are vital to it because we take the role and the home in higher education really seriously. I think it's always been important, universities have always been important to deal with challenging problems, but life has become so complex, and problems have become even more wicked, possibly, or we know how wicked they are, at least. And so universities and higher ed and science-based practice is just more important than ever. And figuring out how that can be part of how people make decisions collectively in society is very challenging. We have to be better communicators than ever before because of the increases in technology and the complexity that because of discovery and because of also the complexity of the challenges. So how do we make change from the position of higher ed is the role of 4W. There's other people doing other kinds of things, more like nonprofits or NGOs, but we are saying higher ed, be transformative where you are. So we have a focus on holistic well-being, and I'll share our model briefly. We foster catalyst projects, and I'll tell you which ones we do and which ones we don't and why. And then we have this platform for exchange, conferences and fora, to give voice to women. Voice is an incredibly important part of self-expression. So, and then we have grants and internships that you're all eligible for. So special role of higher education I've talked about, and we have this concept of feminist leadership and gender analysis being at the root of what we do. So gender analysis can have a very kind of structured and objective approach where you look at who makes decisions and how, where you look at roles, you look at what kind of barriers and assets people have and how they might differ by gender or other kinds of intersectional, conditions, and that analysis is a very powerful tool. So it's not feminist philosophy, which I think is also incredibly valuable and important. But when you're doing research, and you want to have a structure, and you think, I did a study on gender because I disaggregated by sex. That is so not all you could be doing with gender analysis. So many areas don't disaggregate by sex that it's actually incredible that when you do, and important that you have enough female subjects in your cohorts to have results be valid across all genders, but there's a lot more to gender analysis. So we try to teach people about that and engage with researchers on that. And then feminist leadership, gets at this idea of centering the lived experiences of women, working collectively. It takes a lot of strength and voice and decisiveness to work collectively. Sometimes we think that's a more sort of wishy-washy or softer thing. It's harder to disagree with someone you really care about and work through it than to, manage by fiat and walk away. So feminist leadership is a gritty thing and something that takes a lot of personal integrity to do. Well-being matters, and I think we have a model of well-being that wants to address, aims to address suffering, and there's this journey, of suffering to subsistence to thriving, and everybody is on that journey and moves around in those spaces, but we try to say that we should never have the goal be subsistence or just stop the suffering. Thriving should always be the context, the thriving for that person that we're walking with or caring for or whatever words you're using, depending on the relationship. Thriving should always be the context for how that's happening, and it really does matter. If you're just trying to make sure someone, subsists and receives a minimum level of care, it's different than if you're taking their dreams and hopes for their best life into account at every moment in some way. And so that concept of thriving is very important. And we really, this is something to put on your wall. Well-being is balance in body, mind, and spirit. I've been late this morning, we started late. Take a breath with that thought. How many minutes in our day do we really feel balance in body, mind, and spirit? And if we don't, how can we offer that as the air around a person we're caring for or a team we're leading? So it's huge, Thriving with positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, accomplishment. It's not the absence of problems that creates this well-being. It's the idea that you are agentic, you're in flow, you're using your talents and skills. So, there's two ways of being out of balance. One is too many stressors, not enough resources. The other is tons of resources, really not enough stress or challenge or tension. I'm depressed, because I'm not feeling meaning. Ennui is what the French call it. But I think there's a sense of flow where you want to have enough challenge in your life that you're excited and engaged and you're not overwhelmed. So we tend to think of, too stressed without realizing, hey, maybe I'm not feeling well because I'm not using a part of myself that is, vital for who I am. So this idea of having moments of contentment and contentedness and feeling energized and resilient and safe is what it's about. And those are moments. The unit of measure for your heartbeat is, you got to keep it going your whole life long. But the unit of measure for this kind of joy or happiness, it's more the moment. There's a lot of times you're working toward the moment, or it was yesterday and you wish you could get it back. But as long as it's in sight, it's really not supposed to be a steady state of bliss. That would even the Dalai Lama isn't experiencing life that way. So don't worry if there are just moments, then you're on the right track. When we talk about well-being, we've kind of evolved this model with and for women. Where if you look here, you see these rings. I call this the daisy model because it looks like a daisy. But if you look closer, there are these rings, and that might remind you of the socio-ecological model that we talk about so much in public health. So you have the self, and you have the family, community, state, global, and the ecological commons. We're really linking this with the health of the planet as well. And then you have these petals that are the dimensions of well-being. And the reason we work this way is because if you talk about resilience, say, or if you talk about some of these other things that are part of well-being, without thinking about all the different spaces in someone's life where that has to happen, you can end up putting all the burden on, a person who's struggling or a survivor or someone who's having special challenges, and suddenly they have to do this heroic resilience thing to be well. That's not really the idea. The idea is that if we want voice to happen, I got to do some things in my little self-circle, that is bounded by place and culture and time and my life trajectory. But there have to be things that happen in my family and community realm that also facilitate my voice. So suddenly it's a community responsibility to create this wellness, to create belonging, to create mutual care, to create, you know, these basic bodily serenity. I can lock my you know, teenage daughters in a room and make sure they're safe, right? But wouldn't it be better if the community was also safe and they could, you know, third graders could ride the bus to, you know, all around the city without worrying, like in some cultures happens. So this idea that each of these petals needs to be expressed and supported in each of the sociological sort of spheres is important. When we worked with women, we kept revising the model. So you'll notice there are some spheres that you don't usually see in the socio-ecological model, and one is peers, and one is emotional and sexual relationships. And that came from our work with survivors of sex trafficking and with teens who said, these spaces are really impacting me, and when you're saying you want me to, you know, have this kind of well-being, I don't, and I need to do stuff myself, I need support in those spaces. And some of the risks are happening in those spaces. And the idea of emotional and sexual relations being that kind of very neutral term, it doesn't say partners, it doesn't say love relationships, but it does say emotional and sexual because of the complex grooming dynamics that happen with trafficking, where people can think they're in a relationship with a boyfriend and suddenly, you know, it's something else. So they wanted to use that term to capture the whole space, and that way you could do more prevention and care there. So I thought that was really interesting. Those were new way, you know, obviously, it's like the peer thing. Obviously, we should be thinking very intentionally about that space. I know you think about the peer space in terms of peer educators and how impactful they can be around health, as you know, health behaviors. But it's a very powerful space, and I think one of our insights is just creating circles for people where they can reflect on their well-being is very powerful. Regarding the petals, a lot of well-being models have different petals that are very similar. You may be familiar with Carol Riff's work. She's with the Institute on Aging here, and she is you know, internationally recognized as a leader in this field. And in discussing this model with her, you know, the petals end up being really similar when you have these kind of sort of crowdsourced or generative or community-based definitions, and it matters what you do with them. And what really matters also is when you say well-being, that's one thing that people can parse and think about, but when you have a more specified nomenclature for it, it allows people to think more deeply about it. So you can say, how are you? Not so good. But if you give me all of these, say I'm really stressed, I'm a grandmother who's taking care of grandchildren, trying to take care of my own health, just found out I have diabetes, I'm thinking about retiring, not sure if I can keep the house, you know, pretty stressful. How are you? I don't know. But then if you say, well, you know, these are some dimensions of well-being, how are you doing on each of these? Do you have a purpose? You know, well, taking care of my grandkids, I damn sure have a purpose, you know. Are you in relationships of mutual care? Well, yeah, I have a lot of people counting on me. I have a few people I can count. Suddenly, you start to be able to specify where your stressors are, but also see your assets, and you feel more well, and you can also focus on getting your needs met, and you might be able to give yourself more permission to do the self-care you need because you're acknowledging these realms. So, you know, language is so powerful and beautiful in terms of what it allows us to see about our lives and articulate. We thought about, when we were using this model with middle schoolers, we thought about, you know, simplifying, and the teacher, and we do have a simpler model, but the teacher who was working with teens, who's worked with at-risk youth quite a lot, said, oh, but they love the word bodily sovereignty. Once they find out they have a right to that, it gives them a language to talk about it, you know, and it's like, why? No one should be able to touch me when I'm walking to class, or say something about how short my shorts are. I remember my daughter had this experience. Someone had taken a picture of her butt, and she just grabbed his phone and said, this is not respectful. You are deleting this. This is not respectful. And it's like, most girls are just going to take that dig into their bodies, right, and be affected by it. So, and I'm sure she was affected by it as well. But anyway, so, you know, bodily sovereignty was one thing. Freedom from harm and how those are different. Mutual care. I'm saying more about this because I think it's really relevant to your space. Mutual care was an interesting one, how it came about, because we were debating about autonomy and independence, which a lot of times we think are goals for ourselves. And it is a very Western notion. Even in the West, most people don't achieve it, I would say. But anyway, we think we do. But the language we came up with instead was this combination of engagement and belonging and mutual care. Mutual care, belonging, came out because it's one thing not to be excluded, and it's another to belong. So we focus a lot on creating spaces that don't exclude. But to create a space that means people belong is different. And so that was very powerful for people to think about, where do you belong and why? You know, how can you create belonging for others? And I think that's even true in our working teams, you know. And mutual care was an interesting one that came from one of those circles with survivors, because they were saying, you know, I have people who would help me out and take care of me, so yeah, I'm connected. But then one of these ladies asked me to babysit. And I was like, she trusts me with her kids, you know. I'm gonna babysit. And suddenly she felt like she was back because of the dignity of that mutual relationship and being trusted, you know. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. So that's where the independence and autonomy comes about. It is important to be those things, but it's also a convenient fiction. Most of us, we've been autonomous all our lives, would have died on the day we were born, and probably you all know that better than any of us. I mean, there's a lot of extreme care throughout the life cycle that we need in order to thrive. So this model is something that has been the basis of a couple of graduate students in doing their doctoral work. We're continually evolving the model, also trying to publish it and use it in different ways. But it really reflects the idea that women that we work with in all these different projects that I'll be telling you about can contribute to how we define well-being. We have, so gender analysis and a well-being framework, it really cuts across all this work. When projects come to us, we try to, you know, get them going with funding, with collegial support and sort of energy, and then also with those theoretical inputs. And we have a number of catalyst projects. There's about 10, and I'm going to whiz through them and tell you about a couple, because I want to talk about OBGYN, and I have a few things for you. So how do we choose our projects? Well, we don't do everything, but we do a lot. So I want to be upfront that we really do things, and we really do have criteria. One is it has to be addressing important need. Two is we have to have good leadership, otherwise someone else should do it who has good leadership. And the third thing is there has to be the potential for scale. That doesn't mean that small projects don't have value, but if we are higher ed and we are UW-Madison, top 25 university in the world, the things we're doing should be oriented towards scale and global impact, or, you know, scaled impact. So we try to make sure that those things are in place. Also, when you're doing like an NGO or something, you say, I want to do this project and I'm going to bring these kinds of people together. But at a university, you have faculty, they're already there. And it's kind of like this sky with all these stars. And you have to do your work, do your creative work, by connecting those strengths rather than creating new spots. And so it's a little bit like constellations in the sky. It was very convenient for us that there is actually a W in the sky. So that's officially now the 4W constellation. But you know, that W or whatever you see in bright stars and what happens when you connect them is really a model for how to make change, and in a big bureaucracy where there's a lot of givens. It's not about you coming in and saying, what's your new vision as a leader? There's already an organization that needs leadership. So, you know, what's happening and how can you connect things in ways that are generative and creative and transformative and healing and fostering well-being. So that's our, you know, framework. We have a Global Artisans Initiative that focuses on microenterprise for women. It started with one small project in Ecuador and is now working in 5 countries where we brought, rather than thinking about, oh, women need to learn math to be able to sell their stuff, and they're handling very complex economies in their households. They don't really need our help with math. What they really needed was the artisan input so that what they're selling is really unique and beautiful, and it's not just a pity purchase. I want to buy this so someone can go to school, but that it's, I want to buy this because it's beautiful. And it's more beautiful because I know that someone's getting to go to school because of this. So we're working in Ecuador, Mexico, Kenya, India, and Nepal now, and it's a really exciting project. Artists at the School of Human Ecology have led that, and their names are there. Then we have this is our largest project. the Streets Project, which is social transformations to end exploitation and trafficking for sex. And we have focused on working with survivors, and a lot of it is speaking back to systems of care, whether they're social work, whether they're the kinds of treatment that they get when they have interactions with the police or legal systems or even healthcare. There's a lot of things that can be triggering in the ways that we care for people, and understanding triggers and understanding what they need at different moments and what they want at different moments, and the need to be able to control the space around you and make even the smallest choices is so important. And so we've brought together survivors and researchers and practitioners in several fora. This is local to global. There's people from Wisconsin, survivors from Wisconsin, from around the world. We have a great report that's coming out that I can share with you in a couple of publications about this. It'd be very interesting to do more, because there's a lot of sort of detection and case finding that could happen. And one of the faculty members doing research in this area, Laura Garassi, is working on screening tools so that you might be able to identify people who could benefit from some counseling or reaching out if they're at some stage in being recruited, groomed, being trafficked, whatever they call it. And it's really tricky thinking about respecting people's choice and agency and keeping people safe in a complicated space. We have this MORE project, which I won't go into. It has to do with financial management for women. We have this holistic project in Malawi that's looking at community care for highly vulnerable households, where usually the parents have died because of AIDS, and either an older child or a grandmother or someone who might have a lot of challenges is left raising children. And so we're trying to create community-based support for that. Health by All Means, some of you may have heard of Araceli Alonso, started this program in Kenya, and it's really beginning with the questions of women and empowering them in health education and becoming promoters, doing all kinds of community interventions. She's written a book by it that I can share with you. But one of the big insights is to start with where women are. And actually not always just start with reproductive health. I mean, women are very interested in their blood sugar levels, or how to manage menopause. We kind of forget about people after they have their babies in global development. And so this is like looking at the whole life course, looking at women from 45 to 80. This is super important. And identifying cancers early and treating them. And this is, things that are happening in many places. We also have a feminine menstrual hygiene project in Ghana. We've reached this has been updated, we've reached 12,000 girls with reusable kits so that they don't lose school. They also get education about reproductive health, about how they get pregnant. Boys get education too, because a lot of reason, it's not just the bleeding and the stained underpants that make girls not want to go back to school. It's when they're humiliated and stigmatized made fun of by boys in the class. It's like, I'm never going back. And so the companion program to what the girls get for the boys is Men Who Know. And they learn about, why we have menstruation and how it facilitates life, and, how to be respectful and so forth. So that project has been great. Just as a little aside, I had a meeting with some of the pediatric residents, and they wanted to know about this project. And I'll say the same to you as I say to them. So when you ask girls or women that you're working with if they have regular access to feminine menstrual hygiene, what do they say? Anybody want to say, what do they say? Do you ever ask? We never ask. And it's a problem in the US too. So, and it's better for the environment to be using reusable menstrual pads. So they came to hear about Ghana. We talked for so long and we talked about Ghana, and obviously it's a whole different thing. But imagine how tough it would be to be here at West High School, just a few blocks away, and you don't have money for menstrual pads. It happens. So we need to think locally to globally about all these things. We have a really wonderful project. I won't go into it, but I have to just say we're translating poetry as part of our 4W, because women who are writing about gender and well-being and environment only in Spanish do not have the English readership. And so we've developed this collective translation project where women from really all over the Americas do this collective translation together. And we have 2 volumes of poetry planned. It's awesome. We have some great political science leadership at UW. This is a pre-existing project. DiPrete is known all over the world. Sometimes we have people here who have international reputations, and we don't know because of lots of reasons. But anyway, Eileen's work is amazing. The Odyssey Project, many of you have heard about, amazing, Emily Auerbach. Molly Carnes' work on leadership. When we go around talking about 4W, people know of Wisconsin and know of Molly's work. The Earth Science Women's Network, started by Tracy Holloway and now led by Erica Marins-Bignata, also unique to UW-Madison, leadership for women in science. So we have a history of doing this kind of leadership here. We're doing some cool environmental stuff. This is a microgrid that can be done in small communities, and so when there's a cyclone and all the electricity goes out, you can get yourself up and running again if you have a decentralized system. Putting it in the hands of women means they can charge people to, charge their cell phones and make a little income and so forth. We have this is a group of spiritual leaders that came here for the Locust Symposium. It relates to some of your mindfulness pregnancy programs and other kinds of stress reduction that you might do. Compassion medicine is a theme here. This is a very misleading photo because the meeting actually did not have a gender focus, and some of us were like, never again are we doing this without a gender focus. But in the middle there is Tequila Chula Nyapa, and we had a morning program out on the lawn. We were all kind of near each other, and someone said, let's get a picture of just the women. And so we got this picture and kind of said, let's plan to do something together around women in climate action. And, one of the things that we thought about is, we talk about climate change as something that's coming. We need to get ready. It's not coming to Dhaka. It's not coming to Port-au-Prince. People have lived with this and learned a lot about resilience. So if we listen to the lived experience of women who've been through these things, we probably can not only be doing the right thing from a human dignity point of view, but do a better job of addressing these challenges that are supposedly coming. There's a huge swath of the human population that are already living with the kinds of disruptions that are, keeping us awake at night. And so let's make the world, safer for everybody with that lived experience informing it. We have something around the mobility of care. This is a global leader on transportation. And what she found, and in a nutshell, because I want to get to the OB/GYN stuff, is we were looking at, and this is an example of gender analysis. You can probably think of corollaries in your own work. We were looking at transportation as if people go to work and they have recreation. And that's why they need mobility. Well, in fact, people were taking people to the doctor. They were getting stuff, to keep their homes the way they wanted. They were taking care of children. There's a lot of care work happening that was invisible. So transportation systems were being planned without facilitating care work. And that reinforced gender roles because, you can't make someone drop the kids off at school if the transportation system doesn't support that. So then someone has to, one person has to do it. So by understanding the mobility of care, you're allowed to create systems that A, are more optimal, and B, allow people to have more fluidity in gender roles. So by focusing on gender, you're able to, be transformative about the roles. So she's going to be coming on April 30th and doing some work with the city of Madison and Milwaukee, which is very exciting. We're doing a lot to support diversity and leadership, and I can tell you about our work with the immigration rights and the Hmong leadership group. I'm going to go on because that'll come up later. We have a big conference every year that brings in a lot of elements, and I know it's hard with schedules to attend, but I'm going to send out the link, and and maybe what I'll do even is suggest a few things that might be particularly of interest to this audience, but and I'll show you a little bit about it. We are also the home of the UNESCO Chair on Gender, Wellbeing, and a Culture of Peace. This is something that we wanted to establish when we began 4W because we understood that a large Midwestern university couldn't really have that global, impact without being part of something like this. So we're the only UNESCO Chair in the United States that brings health and gender together. And we are bringing together all the UNESCO chairs from around the world. These aren't faculty chairs. These are sort of seats of learning or kind of think tanks that have academic activist practice elements and justice elements. And so bringing together those leaders here, that's probably going to happen next fall. It's really exciting. Again, global leadership. And we had Araceli Alonso, who was able to bring this program to UW-Madison, right in our midst for the last 20 years. We also give a prize through that UNESCO chair, and this year Ada Deer, who many of you may know, is an amazing Native American leader from Wisconsin who's been national in her work, and she was the first recipient of that. We celebrate International Women's Day in an awesome way. You wear purple, people from all over the world come, they share art, they share stories, we have some recognition, we share food. This is an example, and it's coming up on March 7th soon. And then this is the conference that I told you about. We're going to be having some writers from Uganda who talk about women's life and health and rights in their fiction and nonfiction accounts. And we're also going to have one of the poets who writes in her indigenous Mixtec language and in Spanish, and then we're translating her work into English and other languages. And then we have the African American Health Network always puts on an awesome panel. These are the speakers this year. And these are some past speakers, just so you know. We've had Vandana Shiva, we've had Donna Shalala, we've had Brigitte Baptiste, who's an incredible transgender environmentalist who is a leading scientist, brilliant thinker, poetic writer. Janet Hyde was one of our speakers, and again, another person who has, global reputation, and we just think, oh, I took Dr. Hyde's class without realizing, what kind of room you're in. We do these learning exchanges and fora, and this is something I'm going to be talking in a minute about, what about you, what about obstetrics and gynecology. One of the things that we do are these smaller fora where we'll dig into a topic with usually, women, people who are living the experience, academics and practitioners. So we've had one on agriculture and one health. We had several on sex trafficking. We had one on gender and climate policy. And these things lead to a lot. They lead to these publications that you see here. We have a feminist leadership one. We have a One Health one. We have one related to the sex trafficking work in a journal called Dignity that was written with one of the jointly with one of the survivors, who's just an amazing person. So there's an opportunity there to think together and write some kind of policy piece and do other kinds of public scholarship. So you're told about journals and academics, and that's important, but public scholarship is also important, knowing how to, especially for your field, knowing how to write an op-ed, knowing how to give a talk that can reach people where they are. And so we have a training, we're working with the op-ed project, which is well known around the country for giving women a voice, and they came and did a program here. We're all trying to write op-eds, we have homework. And then we have grants. We have grant awards for faculty that you're eligible for. The call will be out soon, and I'll make sure it gets to you. We've funded everything from poetry to, again, the sex trafficking work to agriculture, and we have some work with graduate students. Mariela Quesada, who some of you may know, is involved with the doula program with Centro Hispano, and some of that, we funded the first doula training where they were just starting, and they were like, this is something no one will fund. It was not a lot of money, but it got them going because they had a particular doula who had the life experience and cultural knowledge that they had and was the best person to train them. And so we brought that leader that they wanted to them. And then Mangyao Niu, who is from China and actually is in China now because she cannot leave China. She's working with ARA in Kenya, and she's trying to focus on women in science. And as scientists yourselves, I think you'll appreciate this. She uses paper microscopes to teach science to girls and women in rural Kenya. And they go crazy, and they want to become scientists, and they want to become doctors and nurses and so on. So, that's this asset-based thinking of people's thriving, not let's teach them to wash their hands. That's important, I get that. And that can be, that can be pre-game or whatever. But, what about science? What about telescopes and microscopes and, science for everyone? We have internships for undergrads that I won't go into, and as I said, there's some coming events. We have a really nice HSLC event coming up about connecting scientific knowledge and indigenous wisdom with health, and it's going to have Maria Elena Huambachano is a new faculty member here, and she talks about food and health. And she says food security is a weird way of thinking about it from an Indigenous point of view. We think about food sovereignty, and we think about, she said, I'd like to think about rematriation of food systems. So talk about, feminist leadership and transformative thinking. That's just an awesome word. So come and learn more about that word. And then this again is our, this I'm sure can be shared with you. This is our conference. So what about you, briefly? There are some topics that come to mind that are in the space that you're in that you could be doing more on, that we are doing some, and you can reach out to me and figure out how. A lot of the work that we're doing has been global, partly because that's how we started. But maternal mortality and infant mortality, huge strides have been made in the world. I mean, you are a part of an incredible global health legacy, and there's more work to do, but that success in that area gives you a platform for leadership. You can't say global, comparative global learning doesn't work, because it's worked in this area. And we've more than halved the number of infant mortality, even with doublings of population since the 90s. So it's a lot of work to do, but good work has been done. Reproductive health rights, figuring out how to talk to people in different spaces about the right to family planning and abortion is really complicated, and I think an important conversation, and the moral leadership is needed to talk about why we insist that women need to have these choices. Dignity and respect in childbirth is a big topic. And again, you can go into a room and I can talk about studies that have been done about literally physical beating of patients during pregnancy, because we don't want you yelling like that in our hospital around the world. But what about here at home, where people are still remembering a birth experience that they had because there was something about the way they were treated that was painful for them? That is also a topic, and I think it's happening with women of color more than we would like, and I think there's a lot of conversations about that, and a lot of the psychosocial things, assumptions that are made. Like, I have a good friend who, this is just one story, it happens to be, she's a woman of color, and she was asked so many times if she was going to have a partner with her during her birth, because people thought she wouldn't. And at that time, she worked so hard to put together the beautiful family she had, and she did have a partner. And to be, to have that question came up, it was difficult for her, and it's the thing she remembers about her birth experience. Harmful practices in families, female cutting is the one that comes to mind, but there's a lot of others, and there's things that happen in all cultures, and I think, again, you have the moral authority to be talking about this, figuring out how to have respectful conversations, and figure out how do we not do inadvertent harm as public health professionals, in my case, or as nurses and physicians in your case. Positive sexuality, needs to always be there. I have one anecdote. I know we're running out of time, but I have to tell the story. I had a student, this is a number of years ago at another institution, come to me who had been cut as a child. And she had gotten married, she was getting married. And I was like the married lady in her life, right? And so it's not like a prissy culture where you never talk about sex, but nobody should be having sex except married women. And married women should be able to tell you stuff. And she came to me and she said, am I going to be able to have an orgasm? And, how can I do that, right? And this is a really important question that no one asked her in her routine care. And depending on how much she was cut, or there are ways that you can really get to the bottom of things so that she could know what she could experience and what she couldn't, and so forth. And physical therapists could be doing this, but we tend to think of female cutting in one space, positive sexuality in another. Actually, they're both the same. And again, that's that idea of thriving. That positive sexuality should be on the table even when we're in that space where we're talking about something like cutting. And in fact, I won't go into the details of what her sexual experience were, but she made sure that younger women in her family were not cut, and does have a beautiful family at this time. So feminist leadership in health systems is leadership is good, feminist leadership is better, and it's very hard to be a woman leader. And so when you get there, it's very easy to lead traditionally and lead your system well, do what your dean or your dean's dean or your dean's dean's dean wants you to do, and the agenda of being transformative takes second place. And being transformative, really in the 4W mindset, it needs to be tied for first if we're really going to change things. So if you're lucky enough to get into a position of power, think about what it means to be transformative, and rather than some of the codes of power in the hierarchies in medicine and so forth, they can be undone by leaders, by example, because people care and they don't want those invisible codes to be operative. But undoing that is a really important agenda item too. Not to overwhelm you before breakfast, but got to be done. So with that, there's a lot we could do, and I'm going to leave you with this graphic. These are the Sustainable Development Goals that are so important in our era. And in the middle there is health and well-being, and that's where you reside. But each of the other goals interrelates to that. So if you want to think about being holistic and health and all policy, you can look at, what is happening with biodiversity? How does that relate to what I'm doing? What is happening with urbanization? What is happening with clean water? So the ones that are easy, gender equity, food security, poverty, clean water, these are all impacting the care you give. And so this framework of the Sustainable Development Goals can be a really nice way to think holistically about a specific project. And if you don't know what the Sustainable Development Goals are, it's a UN initiative that defines parameters for well-being. There's metrics to each of these. They deal with basic needs, they deal with peace, and they deal with sustainability. And it gives you a great framework for interdisciplinary work for change, or for operationalizing health and all policies. If you've found that you like that, but it's hard to know what to do with that, here's some specifics. So the exciting thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is that they are now being applied in US cities and communities and states, as well as around the world. So the Millennium Development Goals, it was for everybody but us. But now we do begin to have some metrics. I'll end with a teaser, that there have been the top 100 metropolitan service areas have been rated, and Madison is number 5 in performance on the Sustainable Development Goals. Which, let's be happy for a minute, and then let's decide we need to do better, because probably there's problems with the metric, and also the responsibility of leadership. If we're number 5, then we need to lead, and do better, and especially where disparities are concerned, where gender equity and all kinds of disparities are concerned. So I think there's a big agenda that we could explore together with women's health, obstetrics and gynecology, the whole life cycle that you're dealing with, and thinking about these big ideas and thinking about really transformative leadership, this holistic framework, and making change with the hopeful approach that people deserve, even in difficult times when things feel hopeful. I think it's a moral imperative to be hopeful, and sometimes we think of it, again, soft skill, right? It really requires a fair amount of brutal persistence to be hopeful every day, and I think that's probably what the world is asking from us right now. We all have a lot of, just by virtue of where you're sitting and what you're doing, there's so much you can do. So I hope that we have a chance to do more together, and thank you so much for having me this night.
Well, that's tremendous work. We have time for one question. I know everybody's got to go to work, so they're working now. No, it's fine. Well, listen, Lori, thank you very much.
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate your work.